The alchemy of sacred love. When the soul recognizes itself in another, you are reading these words because something within you died. Not the catastrophic death of despair, but the necessary death that Jung called nigredo, the blackening, the dissolving of false identities. You love someone in a way that most humans never experience in their entire incarnation. While your colleagues scrolled through dating apps treating connection like a commodity, while your friends performed relationships for social validation, you encountered something that the modern world has forgotten how to name. A mirror held up by the universe itself, showing you the architecture of your own soul. This is not about romance. Romance is the ego's fantasy. The manufactured dream sold by corporations to keep you consuming and dissatisfied. What you experienced was hieros gamos, the sacred marriage that occurs first in the psyche before it can ever manifest in physical reality. You met someone who activated every dormant aspect of your unconscious, pulling forward the shadow you had repressed, the anima or animus you had projected onto fantasy, the self you had not yet claimed as your own divine inheritance. The isolation you feel now is not punishment, it is initiation. In my years studying the human psyche, I observed that those who love most consciously suffer most acutely, not because love itself causes suffering, but because consciousness illuminates everything. You cannot unknow what you have learned about your capacity for devotion, your ability to hold paradox, your willingness to honor another person's journey, even when it diverges from your own hopes. This wisdom has marked you permanently, separated you from the unconscious masses who mistake transaction for connection. Heaven, that realm Jung understood as the collective unconscious. The repository of all human wisdom and archetypal patterns does not intervene in human affairs arbitrarily. It responds to those who have developed sufficient consciousness to work with energies that would overwhelm a less developed psyche. You attracted this experience because your soul was ready for the curriculum, even if your ego believed it was unprepared. This is why I mapped out the 3 keys to a prosperous life, a trilogy designed specifically for old souls like you who find themselves carrying wisdom that contemporary society neither understands nor values. The blueprint I left in that work addresses precisely this disconnect: how to honor your spiritual depth while navigating a world that rewards superficiality, how to transmute profound feeling into grounded action, how to claim prosperity without guilt when you have been taught that suffering equals virtue. The link waits in the pinned comment below, a practical map for those ready to alchemize their awakening into embodied reality. But let us return to this moment of your sacred heartbreak, because within it lies the key to understanding why you were chosen for this particular initiation. Your nervous system is speaking a language that few humans comprehend. While others experience relationship endings as simple loss, you are processing something far more complex: the integration of projected wholeness, the reclaiming of disowned power, the grief of recognizing that another soul's timing does not align with your readiness. This is not melodrama. This is the literal death and rebirth cycle that mystics have documented across centuries, now happening within the container of modern American life, where you still have to show up to work, pay bills, and pretend everything is fine. The shadow mechanics of sacred connection. Why your psyche chose this mirror. Let us examine the psychological architecture of what occurred, because understanding the mechanics will liberate you from the tyranny of self-blame that I observe consuming so many chosen ones. When you met this person, your unconscious recognized something it had been seeking, a projection screen sophisticated enough to hold your unlived potentials. This is not weakness. This is the psyche's natural developmental process. We project onto others the aspects of ourselves we have not yet integrated, and intimate relationships serve as the crucible where these projections become visible. Your shadow appeared in 3 primary manifestations during this connection, each one carrying a lesson your ego was unready to accept. First, there was the shadow of your own power. You possess a capacity for deep feeling, intuitive knowing, and emotional presence that frightens most people because it demands they also show up fully. When your soulmate withdrew or became inconsistent, your shadow whispered, "See, your depth is too much. You must make yourself smaller to be loved." This is the wound of the empath, the chosen one who learned early that authenticity leads to abandonment. But examine this pattern more closely through the Jungian lens. What appears as your partner's withdrawal is often their own shadow material, their unintegrated capacity for intimacy, their fear of being consumed by another's emotional intelligence, their terror of being truly seen beyond the persona they present to the world. You did not create their resistance. You activated what was always there, dormant in the unconscious, waiting for sufficient safety to emerge. And here is the alchemical truth that most people miss. Their withdrawal was not rejection of you, but their psyche's protective mechanism against premature transformation. The second shadow manifestation was your relationship with time. American culture has conditioned you to expect rapid outcomes, instant gratification, linear progression from connection to commitment. But the soul operates on eternal time, kairos rather than chronos. Your unconscious understood this truth, which is why you felt pulled to wait, to trust, to allow unfolding rather than forcing closure. Yet your ego, shaped by a society that values efficiency over depth, tormented you with questions. Why is this taking so long? Why isn't there clarity? What is wrong with me that I cannot make this progress faster? Nothing is wrong with you. You are experiencing what Jung termed the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously without collapsing into either extreme. You held love and uncertainty. You held hope and acceptance. You held connection and separation as one paradoxical truth. This capacity is extraordinarily rare because it requires tremendous ego strength combined with humility. The willingness to not know while trusting the process of knowing will eventually arrive. The third shadow element was your relationship with suffering itself. Chosen ones often carry what I call the martyr complex, the unconscious belief that love requires self-sacrifice, that devotion means tolerating disrespect, that loyalty demands abandoning your own needs. This is not true love. This is the ego's distortion of love, shaped by religious conditioning that glorified suffering as spiritual virtue. Your psyche used this connection to surface this pattern so you could finally see it, examine it, and choose something different. Watch how your body responds when I say this. You are allowed to love someone deeply and still choose yourself. Notice the resistance that arises, the guilt, the voice that says, "But if I truly loved them, wouldn't I wait forever? Wouldn't I tolerate anything?" That voice is not wisdom. It is your internalized oppressor, the part of you that learned self-abandonment as a survival strategy in a world that punished your sensitivity. Your soulmate served as the mirror reflecting this pattern back to you. Every time they showed confusion, pulled away, or failed to match your clarity, your unconscious was asking, will you abandon yourself again? Will you make yourself smaller? Will you betray your knowing to maintain connection? And you, dear chosen one, did something revolutionary. You held yourself. You honored your truth even when it hurt. You chose integrity over fantasy. This is the individuation process in action, the ego learning to bow to the self's wisdom rather than the other way around. But let us go deeper into the mechanics of projection and reclamation, because this is where most people remain trapped for years, decades, sometimes entire lifetimes. When you met this person, your anima or animus, the contrasexual archetype that Jung identified as carrying our unlived potentials, became activated. For a woman, the animus represents her capacity for clear thinking, assertive action, spiritual wisdom. For a man, the anima represents his capacity for deep feeling, intuitive knowing, relational wisdom. These archetypes live primarily in the unconscious until an external person appears who embodies these qualities strongly enough to pull them into awareness. You looked at your soulmate and saw reflected back qualities you possess but have not fully claimed. Perhaps their calm in chaos reflected your own untapped inner peace. Their spiritual awareness reflected your own undeveloped mysticism. Their emotional complexity reflected your own unacknowledged depth. This recognition felt like love at first sight, but Jung would call it projection, the unconscious attempting to show you what you must integrate within yourself. The task of individuation is to withdraw these projections gradually, reclaiming the energy and qualities we have placed onto another person. This does not diminish the love. It transforms the love from unconscious dependency into conscious appreciation. You no longer need them to be whole. You recognize them as a catalyst for discovering your own wholeness. This is painful because the ego experiences it as loss, as the death of the fantasy that another person can complete us. But the self experiences it as liberation, as the birth of authentic power. Your psyche orchestrated this entire experience. The meeting, the intensity, the confusion, the separation, to force you to confront your relationship with your own inner masculine or feminine. Are you waiting for someone outside yourself to give you permission to claim your power? Are you seeking validation from another to prove your worth? Are you using relationship as escape from the terrifying but necessary work of becoming who you actually are beneath the layers of conditioning? These questions are not comfortable. They are designed to shatter comfortable illusions. But chosen ones are selected precisely because they have the psychological resilience to face these questions without fragmenting into denial or blame. You have the rare capacity to look at your own shadow without turning away, to acknowledge your patterns without drowning in shame, to accept responsibility for your projections without invalidating the genuine connection you experienced. The American cultural context adds particular layers to this process. You live in a society that treats relationships as achievements, as validations of worth, as proof of success. The collective unconscious here is saturated with messages that you are incomplete without a partner, that reaching certain milestones by certain ages determines your value, that independence is failure rather than strength. These cultural shadows infect individual psyches, making it nearly impossible to navigate sacred connections without absorbing toxic narratives. You were taught to commodify love, to treat it as a resource to be acquired and displayed. Dating apps train you to evaluate humans like products, swiping through faces as though souls can be sorted by algorithm. Social media teaches you to perform relationships for audience approval rather than experience them authentically. And beneath all this noise, your soul was crying out for something real, something true, something that honored the depth you carry. When you met your soulmate, your psyche rebelled against this entire system. You loved in a way that defied cultural programming. You refused to perform. You allowed vulnerability without guarantee. You gave without keeping score. This is why the experience feels so disorienting now. You stepped outside the collective trance, experienced connection from your authentic self, and now you must integrate this knowing while living in a world that does not recognize its value. The shadow of American individualism also appears in your story. You have been taught that needing anyone is weakness, that self-sufficiency is the ultimate goal, that interdependence is codependency. This cultural lie has severed millions from their natural human need for authentic connection. When you found someone who awakened your capacity for vulnerable intimacy, your cultural conditioning warred against your soul's truth. Part of you wanted to surrender to the connection. Another part judged yourself harshly for losing yourself in another person. But Jung understood that individuation is not isolation. Becoming whole does not mean becoming invulnerable. You do not transcend relationship. You learn to engage it consciously, bringing your integrated self to connection rather than your fragmented ego seeking completion. This sacred relationship, regardless of its external form, has taught you the difference. You now know what it feels like to love from wholeness. You cannot unknow this, and you can never again tolerate the shallow substitutes that mainstream culture offers as love. The archetypal journey. Why chosen ones experience sacred love? As Crucible, your story is not unique. It is archetypal. Across centuries, mystics and depth psychologists have documented this pattern. The soul that awakens through the crucible of sacred relationship, learning to distinguish between projection and perception, between ego desire and self-wisdom, between human love and divine recognition. You are walking a path that Rumi walked, that Dante walked, that countless unnamed mystics walked, before language could capture their experience. This is the path of using romantic connection as spiritual initiation rather than escape from spiritual work. In the tarot, which Jung studied as a map of the individuation process, your journey corresponds to several major arcana. You began in the lovers, not the shallow romance version, but the original meaning, the choice between paths, the integration of opposites, the recognition of divine reflection in another. You entered the hermit, the necessary withdrawal to process deep experience, the turn inward to seek truth rather than external validation. You passed through the tower, the destruction of false beliefs about love, the collapse of ego's agenda, the stripping away of illusions. And now you are in death, not literal death, but the profound transformation that occurs when who you were can no longer contain who you are becoming. This archetypal pattern appears because chosen ones are not selected for ordinary lives. You incarnated with specific soul contracts, agreements made before embodiment to serve as bridges between realms, to hold consciousness in a world that resists consciousness, to demonstrate that another way of being is possible even within oppressive systems. Your sacred relationship was part of this contract. Not necessarily to create a traditional partnership, but to activate both souls' highest potentials through the alchemy of authentic encounter. The divine feminine and masculine archetypes were dancing through your connection, attempting to find balance within each of you individually before they could find balance between you. If you identify as feminine in essence, your soulmate carried the projected qualities of your undeveloped inner masculine. Perhaps strength you had not claimed, clarity you had not trusted, spiritual authority you had not embodied. If you identify as masculine in essence, your soulmate carried the projected qualities of your undeveloped inner feminine. Perhaps emotional depth you had not accessed, intuitive knowing you had not honored, relational wisdom you had not integrated. The confusion and inconsistency you experienced from your soulmate was not malice. It was their own archetypal war playing out in real time. Their psyche was not ready for what your presence demanded. Full consciousness, radical authenticity, the death of protective personas. Most humans spend entire lifetimes avoiding this level of transformation because it requires confronting every lie they have told themselves, every mask they have worn, every wound they have avoided. You arrived in their life like a lightning bolt of truth, and their nervous system quite naturally went into defense mode. This is where the magician archetype becomes relevant to your journey. The magician understands that consciousness itself is creative power, that what we focus upon expands, that our internal state generates our external reality. You have been living as an unconscious magician, manifesting circumstances that reflect your internal conflicts. attracting mirrors for your unintegrated shadow, creating situations that force you to choose between ego comfort and soul growth. Now the universe is inviting you to become a conscious magician, to direct your considerable creative power intentionally rather than reactively. The hermit archetype also lives within you now, calling you to the sacred solitude where real integration occurs. American culture fears solitude, treating it as loneliness, as failure, as something to be medicated or distracted away. But chosen ones know that solitude is different from loneliness. Solitude is the conscious choice to turn inward, to listen to the soul's voice without the static of others' projections and expectations. The hermit teaches that we must withdraw periodically from the collective to remember who we are beneath social conditioning. Your soulmate activated the hermit in you by creating circumstances where external relationship became impossible to maintain in the old patterns. Their withdrawal, whether conscious or unconscious, forced you to stop seeking completion outside yourself. This was not cruelty. This was the universe's perfect design. You needed the mirror removed temporarily so you could see your own face clearly, so you could distinguish between your authentic feelings and your projected fantasies. The hero's journey, which Jung recognized as the universal pattern of individuation, appears in your story with striking clarity. You received the call to adventure when you met this person. The invitation to leave your ordinary world of shallow connections and enter the extraordinary realm of soul recognition. You encountered threshold guardians, your own fears, their resistance, societal judgments, practical obstacles. You descended into the underworld, the dark night of confusion, the dismantling of certainty, the confrontation with your own shadow. Now you are in what Joseph Campbell called the belly of the whale, that space of complete dissolution where the old self has died, but the new self has not yet fully formed. This is the most dangerous part of the journey because the ego, terrified of annihilation, will attempt to retreat back to familiar patterns. It will tell you to settle for less, to abandon your knowing, to return to unconscious relationships that do not challenge you. This is the test. Will you trust the death process enough to allow complete transformation, or will you resurrect a modified version of who you were before, slightly improved, but fundamentally unchanged? Chosen ones who successfully navigate this stage emerge as what Jung called the twice-born, individuals who have died to naive idealism and been resurrected in mature wisdom. You will never again confuse intensity with intimacy, passion with compatibility, chemistry with consciousness. You will never again tolerate relationships where you must diminish yourself to maintain connection. You will never again abandon your knowing to preserve another person's comfort. This is the gift your soulmate has given you, though it is wrapped in the paper of apparent loss. The wounded healer archetype also appears in your narrative, the one who must experience profound wounding to develop the capacity to truly heal others. Every chosen one carries this archetype because superficial suffering creates superficial compassion, but soul-level pain creates soul-level empathy. You have now walked through the fire of loving someone deeply who could not meet you in that depth, and this experience has shattered any remaining judgment you held toward others struggling in relationship. You understand now, in your bones, that consciousness cannot be forced, that readiness cannot be manufactured, that love alone cannot heal someone who is not ready to be healed. This wisdom makes you dangerous to the status quo. You can no longer participate unconsciously in the collective delusion that performing relationship according to social scripts equals genuine connection. You can no longer pretend that following the timeline, dating, engagement, marriage, children, guarantees happiness or fulfillment. You have seen behind the curtain, and what you saw was both more beautiful and more terrifying than the fantasy. Real love requires real consciousness, and most humans are not yet ready for that level of responsibility. The orphan archetype may also resonate with your experience. The feeling of being abandoned by the universe, left alone to figure out truths that no one prepared you for, cast out from the collective's comforting illusions. Orphans carry deep wounding around belonging, constantly questioning whether they are too much or not enough, wondering if they will ever find their true home. But the psychological task is to become the self-mother or self-father, to provide for yourself the unconditional love and acceptance that you once sought externally. Your soulmate could not be your home because no external person can fill that role. Home is the relationship between your ego and yourself, the alignment of your conscious personality with your deeper soul essence. When this internal relationship is fragmented, we seek completion in others. When this internal relationship is integrated, we share wholeness with others rather than demanding they provide it. Your sacred connection has taught you this truth, though the lesson came through the pedagogy of pain rather than pleasure. The sovereign archetype is awakening within you now, the part of your psyche that can claim authority over your own kingdom without needing external validation or permission. Sovereigns understand boundaries not as walls, but as sacred edges that protect the realm of the self. They can say no with grace, can speak truth without aggression, can honor their own needs without guilt. This archetype develops slowly, through repeated experiences of choosing self-respect over others' approval, through practicing discernment about where to invest energy, through learning that your value is inherent rather than earned through performance. Most Americans live as perpetual subjects, waiting for some external authority, partner, parent, employer, society, to grant them permission to fully inhabit their lives. Chosen ones are being activated as sovereigns because the collective consciousness is ready for models of authentic power that do not rely on domination or control. Your sacred relationship has been the training ground for this emergence. Every time you chose to honor your boundaries, every time you spoke your truth despite fear, every time you released control over the outcome, you were practicing sovereign consciousness, the language of synchronicity, how the universe confirmed your soul contract. Now we must address the phenomenon that Western psychology struggles to explain, but Jung documented extensively: synchronicity. The meaningful coincidences that surrounded your connection were not accidents, wishful thinking, or mere pattern recognition. They were communications from the objective psyche, what Jung called the collective unconscious, confirming that you were engaged in work that transcended your individual ego concerns. Remember the moments when your paths crossed unexpectedly, when you thought of them seconds before they contacted you, when songs or symbols appeared repeatedly with precise timing. Remember the dreams that carried information you could not have known consciously, the intuitive hits that proved accurate despite contradicting logic. These were not coincidences, but synchronicities, the collision of inner and outer realities when consciousness reaches sufficient intensity. Jung understood that synchronicity occurs at the intersection of the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and external reality. When we are engaged in deep psychological work, especially shadow integration and animus development, we create what physicists might call a coherence field that draws related events, people, and circumstances into our orbit. Your consciousness during this sacred connection was highly activated, which made you a magnet for synchronistic phenomena. But here is where most people misinterpret synchronicity. They treat it as proof that external circumstances will conform to their ego's desires. They collect signs like evidence, building a case that the universe is conspiring to give them what they want. This is not how synchronicity functions. Synchronicity appears to confirm that you are on the right path for your soul's evolution, not that your ego's agenda will be fulfilled according to its timeline. The synchronicities surrounding your connection were confirming that you were doing deep soul work, that both of you were engaged in significant psychological transformation, that the relationship itself was serving a purpose beyond conventional romance. They were not guarantees of a specific external outcome. This is a painful truth that many chosen ones resist accepting because the ego desperately wants the universe to validate its hopes rather than support the self's agenda. Consider the repeating numbers many chosen ones report: 11, 11, 222, 444, and other sequences. In Jungian terms, these are eruptions of the collective unconscious into conscious awareness, moments when the boundary between inner and outer reality becomes permeable. Numbers carry archetypal significance. 1 represents unity and beginning, 2 represents duality and partnership, 4 represents stability and incarnation. When these numbers appear repeatedly during a significant relationship, your psyche is processing the archetypal themes the connection is activating. The number sequences are not telling you, this relationship will work out. They are telling you, pay attention, something significant is happening at the level of soul and psyche. They are invitations to deeper awareness, not confirmations of ego fantasy. This distinction is crucial because many chosen ones torture themselves trying to decode synchronicities as literal predictions rather than symbolic communications. Dreams also carried messages throughout your connection. Though you may not have recognized their significance at the time, the unconscious speaks in symbols and stories, not literal instruction. If you dreamed of your soulmate, the dream figure was often not about them as a person, but as a symbol of some aspect of yourself. If you dreamed of losing them, the dream was likely processing your fear of losing contact with the projected parts of yourself they carried. If you dreamed of union, the dream was often rehearsing the internal integration that must occur before external union becomes possible. American culture has forgotten how to work with dreams, treating them as meaningless neural noise rather than the psyche's nightly attempt to process experience and communicate with consciousness. Chosen ones must reclaim this ancient practice. Your dreams during this sacred connection were a running commentary on your individuation process, showing you where you were resisting growth, where you were avoiding truth, where you were projecting rather than perceiving clearly. The synchronistic events that brought you together initially, the chance meeting, the unusual circumstances, the sense that invisible forces were orchestrating your connection, these were real. The universe does conspire to bring together souls who have agreed to catalyze each other's awakening. But here is the part that most people miss. Sometimes the awakening comes through union, and sometimes it comes through separation. Sometimes the soul contract is to be together for a lifetime, and sometimes it is to shatter each other's illusions so both can evolve beyond their current limitations. Your ego wants to know which category your connection falls into. It wants certainty, clarity, a definitive answer about whether this person is your destiny or your lesson. But the self knows that this very need for certainty is what must die in you. The lesson is not about securing a specific outcome.